Hi everyone, Omid from CodeLab here. Welcome back to the second video in our series on React. In this one, we will be discussing the basics of creating a functional component in React, as well as topics like JSX. Now, the first thing that I want to kick off with is just by discussing the structure of this index.js file. This is not a file that you will normally ever need to edit. It serves sort of as like that base file that, as I mentioned in the last video, puts your code in place of that div with the ID of root. So like right in here, I have this React DOM.render, React strict mode, this weird app thing, this weird document.getElement by ID root. Again, not something that you need to really understand. Just know that this code replaces root. One thing that I do want to point out though is line 9. You'll notice that this says app inside of what looks like a self-closing HTML tag, which is interesting because we actually have a file called app that is app.js. And now before you know what any of the syntax here on this page means, this is actually a hint to how React basically builds itself, and that's with using something called components. So in normal HTML, you basically write all of your code out, and if you have like duplicate code, you just have to copy and paste it basically. But in React, what you can do is you can actually have reusable code called components. So here I have all this code inside of this app.js file. Again, we don't know what it means yet, but I have all of these 25 lines of code, and essentially this is exported as a JavaScript module, like as a regular JavaScript library, basically. So that means that I have all of these 25 lines of code available to import into a different file anywhere. So I can actually import them here on line 4. Again, don't worry about how this statement works, but know that I can import that app code, and now I can actually call it here on line 9. So instead of having my index.js be all of my React code, I can use components to say, okay, put all of my app code inside of app.js. And then I will just call app.js as a component with this app's self-closing tag right here. And again, this is mainly useful because you can go like multiple levels deep. Like let's say I have a button, let's say that I have a block of text with a button next to it that needs to be repeated 3 times on my page. I could copy paste my code 3 times, but the code is like 40 lines long for whatever reason, right? Because of that, I can put those 40 lines into their own component. We can call it like textblock.js. And then just like how I did inside of index.js, I can call textblock right here. And I can just say, hey, that component, put all of that code right here into my HTML. Just embed it right here into my HTML. Very simple, very straightforward, and it's honestly incredibly useful. Now, let's talk about how to actually build a component, because honestly, when you are developing in React, that's about 99% of your time, just building and modifying and editing and linking together components. You are developing React components, and they all follow pretty much an identical pattern. So there's sort of 3 ways I like to break it up. The first is this stuff here at the top, your imports. So from our JavaScript video, we had those imports. These function pretty much exactly the same with a little extra thing added on, which is this is also where you import your style sheets like with CSS. So like HTML's head, this is where those imports are happening. Like if you ever needed to link like a style sheet, although you don't because we write our JavaScript differently in React, I'll show you guys that in a second. Sorry, scripts, not style sheets. Like if you needed to import like a script or like a CSS style sheet, this is where you would do it. And you'll notice that they actually do it by saying import app.css. So there's no more like link or style tags where you have to put like the relative path. Instead, you literally just import that CSS file, and now you have access to all of those different class and ID names and media queries and things like that. And if you need to import an image, all that you have to actually do is just import it with a specific variable name that you want to represent that image file, and then say the path, and now you have access to this logo image. I'll show you how to use it in a second, but now you have access to the image. And if you need to import some external like third-party library, like the Math.js one from our JavaScript video, you can go ahead and do that. That will function the exact same way. So these are just the 2 sort of like extra ways to import things like images and CSS style sheets. No real importing of scripts because we write our JavaScript differently in React. that I'll be showing you soon. Lastly here at the bottom, we just say export default app. This is just essentially the name that we are exporting. Without writing this, we could not import this. So index.js's import of app would not work without this. And the general rule, just to avoid naming confusions, is that you should export default whatever the name of the file is, and then you should just import it with that exact same name. Just keep everything consistent. Whatever you name the file should be used as the export name and as the import variable name. Okay. And again, just to clarify, this is the import variable name. So like logo right here is a variable name to represent my logo. Here on line 4 of index.js, app is the name of the variable that represents all of that HTML code that I need to call with some self-closing tag somewhere, like I did on line 9 back here. Okay, now let's get to the real meat of things here, this function, this big block of code. So what exactly is going on inside of here right now? So basically, in React, the way that we write our code is in a function that returns JSX. So here you'll notice we have a function called app, which is conveniently, once again, the name of our file. And inside of that, we have a return block. And this return block is what actually gets put out inside of this app right here. I said that it was the whole thing. That was just to make it easier to explain at the very beginning, but it's really this code right here with everything else embedded inside of it that needs to be. So this is the HTML, quote unquote, that I'm returning. But again, this is not HTML. It looks like HTML to the naked eye, but this is JSX. JSX is essentially HTML with regular features built on top of it to make it more JavaScript-esque. And that's why I said earlier in our first video that we are, quote unquote, writing JavaScript in React. You don't really write HTML because you're writing JavaScript, and JSX is a form of JavaScript, basically. Not exactly, but that's sort of the link right there. And this actually makes it super easy to use JavaScript inside of React. More on that in a second. But essentially, this looks just like HTML, but there's just a few small caveats. And actually, through that, I do want to quickly go over. So you will see right here, for example, that we have this A tag. And right here, if I want to link a CSS class, you guys are used to seeing class is equal to, right? But now you're going to see class name is equal to. So slightly different in React, just a thing to keep a heads up on, but now it's class name. The CSS itself looks exactly the same. They have some like animation stuff here, no worries. But this app link class, it exists inside of here. It's literally just like a text color. Same standard stuff that you guys have seen before in regular HTML CSS, just a different name. Now to link an on-click function, that's a bit different. So remember in our JavaScript video, we wanted to make something happen when a button was clicked. And we had that weird like JavaScript code to access our DOM. Here, a lot of that logic is actually abstracted, which makes things super easy because you don't have to remember all of these weird DOM functions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually delete all of this code right here. And I'm just going to leave this top level div. I'm just going to get rid of this CSS class. Don't need it. So now I'm just returning a div. And you need a div as a top level thing in your return. Usually, not always, but usually because you have to return a bundle. And we use a div to essentially bundle all of our HTML code and hold it, because you can only return one thing, right? Like that logic holds in pretty much most programming languages. Same with JavaScript. You can only return one thing from this function app. So the one thing that we return is a div. And that div holds a bunch of different HTML elements. That's how we can return a ton of stuff on a page, because we're just returning like one div. But that was a little side tangent to return back to this on-click discussion here. So let's say that I have a button and I'm saying click me on it, right? Now, if we go back to our code right here, you'll see this click me, nothing's going to happen, right? So if I actually go split screen right here so I can show you guys as this happens. So right now, again, nothing happens when you click. But what I can do is, instead of doing all that extra stuff, I can just literally say on click and then my function name. So this basically says that on a click being registered to the button, run some function. No longer do I have to like add an event listener and like mess directly with the DOM or the document. And that stuff is actually done for me. Now, two things here. You'll notice that I have an error in my code. So when that happens, my page will not compile. It'll get angry at me and spit an error out in the console, and it will nice and prettily display that exact same error on the localhost 3000 web page as well. But the reason why that exists, why this error exists right now, is because we haven't actually defined that function. So, and this is the reason why I said that we don't really use script tags anymore, is because here in JavaScript, this function is what's being exported, and this return value is what's being processed. So we can actually write any JavaScript code that we need as just regular code, as if we were writing a regular Node app inside of this function above our return statement. So I can actually just like literally define a function called function name right here with empty parameters, and now I can just console log out, hello, you know? And now you'll notice that into my developer console inside of Chrome, once I click this button, which is a little bit small here, it will now say hello world. So before, again, I had to add that event listener in HTML, CSS. This is a bit more JavaScript-esque. It's a bit more straightforward. There's no real DOM that we have to worry about messing with. React does that underneath the hood for us to add that event listener. Now, a quick little caveat with the onClick is that if you want to pass parameters to the function, you cannot just do this. So let's say I have like param1 right here, and I want to print out param1. This will not work. If you want to pass parameters and thus put the parentheses next to the function name, you have to add it as an arrow function. Okay, I won't go too deep into why, but basically if you put the parentheses inside of a function name for the onClick, it will run that function once on the page's first load and it will not run it again. So you need this arrow function if you want to pass parameters and actually make the onClick work like it should. Now I'm passing in param1, I can pass in a string saying yo, just something like that. And if we open up my console again, you'll see that now that parameter gets printed out after my hello world statement. So again, fairly simple, straightforward, but that makes it really easy to do onClicks instead of just adding event listeners. You can also embed JavaScript variables directly into your code. So this is a poor example right here. We'll have better ones later. But let's just say that I create a num called 3, and then now I want to add that num displayed out somewhere because that variable might change. So now I can have an h1 that says num right here, and now you'll see that my 3 prints. And basically all that you have to do is wrap your variable with brackets on both sides, those little curly brackets, inside of your regular HTML tags, quote unquote, the really JSX tags though. And now your number embeds directly into your HTML code and onto your web page. But that's all for the first video. Hopefully you all found this pretty useful, and I will see you all in the next one. Thank you.